Alright, I know Wanda's probably done with her television-ifying the world and she's too busy learning how to pull a rabbit out of her hat or something, but do you think she'd do us a favor and give us a dysfunctional Thanos family sitcom? Fine, probably not. But Thanos' family and history deserves to be highlighted, and thanks to the upcoming Eternals movie, we might get that wish. How can the upcoming movie bring Thanos back to the MCU and give him an even better backstory? Well, it has something to do with his family. Let's get started right now. The Eternals are coming. Eventually. Soon? Maybe. Please stand by. But they'll be here one day, and with their arrival, the entire MCU is going to change. The Eternals are, well, eternal, and live for basically ever, so their movie is going to have a lot of ground to cover. I mean, most MCU movies seem to take place over the course of a few days, minus some exceptions. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Eternals covers thousands upon thousands of years in like a 2.5-hour time frame, don't you think? But the most interesting aspect about the Eternals is how they can revisit past events and past characters. Mainly, there's one big purple alien who the Eternals could reintroduce. Hey, he did say he was inevitable after all. It's Thanos. The Mad Titan himself has a complicated history with the Eternals in the comics, and it looks like, from the brief hints we got in Endgame, they're sticking with his comic backstory, which means the Eternals and Thanos are practically related. Let me explain. Put simply, the Eternals are responsible for Thanos. Long ago, the Eternals were all living together. Everything was hunky-dory. But like every group that lives together for an extended period of time, a division started to happen. Most of the Eternals wanted to keep things exactly how they were, but there was a small group of immortal beings who wanted to increase their numbers and essentially create more eternal-like beings. This caused a lot of infighting, and eventually a compromise was made to conduct an experiment. A new colony would be created on Titan to see if it was possible to create a new species from the Eternals' DNA. It ended up working, and the people of Titan were born as genetic offshoots of the Eternals, and that's where Thanos comes in. In the comics, Thanos' mother was Susan, and right off the bat, their relationship was tough. You see, you may have noticed Thanos was purple, and in their colony, purple-skinned children carried the deviant gene. And Eternals and deviants hate each other. So Susan initially wanted to kill her own child, until Thanos' father, Alars, intervened. We know the MCU is keeping at least Thanos' father the same, with the scene with Red Skull in Infinity War revealing that Thanos' father is in fact Alars. And that opens the door for some exciting stories. With the Eternals movie, we can see all of the Titanites on Titan, as well as Thanos and his family before its destruction. So overall, Thanos and his family are basically linked to the Eternals, but it goes even deeper than that. Let's throw the Celestials into the mix as well. We've gotten brief glimpses of the Celestials in the MCU, mainly through Guardians of the Galaxy, where we see a glimpse of a few of them, including the massive hollowed-out head of the Celestial that the universe calls Nowhere. So how are they all related? Well, the Celestials were the ones who created the Eternals and the Deviants when they were performing genetic experiments on early humanity like 1,000,000 years ago. So basically, Celestials created Eternals, and Eternals created Thanos. No wonder Thanos was such a huge threat. He's got powerful genes. So how can Thanos' family and backstory be shown in the Eternals? Well, I think Titan is vital for the Eternals because the colony's destruction may give us a hint about where the Eternals were during the events of Infinity War and Endgame. The upcoming movie could give us a glimpse of the Eternals creating Titan and see a young Thanos with his family, which includes his mother and father as well as his brother Eros. We could see this family unit together and thriving until things start to go wrong for Titan. And maybe while Titan starts to tear itself apart because of the lack of resources, the Eternals will have a debate about whether to step in and save them or not. On one hand, the colony on Titan is their creation, and the Eternals are responsible for their safety. But on the other hand, maybe the Eternals vowed to not get involved because they wanted to see if their creation could survive and work out problems on their own. Perhaps they were devastated when Titan destroyed itself, and thinking they failed and destroyed a ton of individuals by messing with the natural order of the galaxy, they vowed to never get involved again in matters of the universe. The MCU might have a difficult time explaining why the Eternals were not around or concerned when Thanos, a member of the population the Eternals created, was rampaging across the galaxy looking for Infinity Stones and then successfully wiped out half the universe. You would think that was something they would want to be invested in. So maybe by tying in the tragedy of Titan to their motivations would help explain that overall, and using a young Thanos as our overall focal point into Titan will immediately make us invested in this colony and what happens to it. Especially if we see Thanos throughout his childhood. You would think someone like Thanos was just always this warforged monster, but the opposite is true. While he was young, Thanos was a pacifist who would only play with his brother Eros and his pets, and he gradually became obsessed with nihilism and death. For the Eternals movie, we could see how Thanos started out and his interactions with his family, and that will overall make him a better villain, because we don't normally see the MCU villains start out as good guys. Most of the time, we're introduced to them as villains and that's it. But it wasn't always that way. There had to be a time when most villains were good people who wanted to do what's right, and then were corrupted. I keep thinking of the Endgame scene where Rhodey talks about going back in time to strangle Thanos in his crib, and that makes me think, if the Avengers did go back and see a young Thanos who was a generally goodish person, could they have gone ahead and took him out then? That's a tough question. Because Thanos deserves more of a backstory. Here's the thing, when he was fully introduced in Avengers Infinity War, he immediately became the best MCU villain we've seen. Not only was he a serious threat, but his motivations and his character were surprisingly deep. Yes, his methods were extreme, and you have to wonder why he wouldn't just use the stones to double the resources in the universe as opposed to wiping out half the population, but he had a nuance to him that was missing in a lot of MCU villains. But then, an unfortunate thing happened in Endgame. There was so much going on in that movie where the focus had to be on our main heroes that Thanos lost his special edge. Sure, this was mainly a Thanos from years earlier, and I could see why a past version of yourself seeing a future version of yourself succeed in your goal but still face resistance would warp your mind. But his turn from destroy half the universe to save it to destroy the whole universe and rebuild it in my image felt very standard bad guy wants to destroy the world type of thing we see in every other movie, you know? So the Eternals could actually reaffirm that yes, Thanos is the most complex and interesting bad guy in the MCU by fleshing out his backstory and showing Thanos' family. We could witness this young pacifist alien slowly start to change his opinions and his beliefs thanks to the war that happens between the Eternals and the Deviants. We could see how the deviant gene that Thanos was born with totally influenced his relationship with his parents and brother to the point where it drives him to wipe out half the universe in order to save it. And we could see it all through the eyes of the Eternals who created Thanos and his colony, which will make us understand their motivations for hiding for so long, even during a crisis like Infinity War and Endgame. Plus, by showing Thanos' family lineage, you're opening up the MCU to exploring Celestials, and given the desire to see Galactus pop up sooner rather than later, this would be the best idea. Thanos is definitely the key to make the Eternals one of the best MCU movies yet, which is something he'd probably be happy about. But the biggest question is, who could they get to play a young Thanos? The Thanos we know is played and voiced by the gravelly Josh Brolin, so what would a teenage Thanos sound like? I sort of hope they just get Josh Brolin and have him keep the same exact voice, but just add in a few voice cracks for puberty. That'd be hilarious. Man, I can't imagine a Thanksgiving at Thanos' house. His mom weeping over her son's existence, the stern father, the kooky eternal grandparent showing up and talking about the Great War. Actually, that does sound like every other Thanksgiving. Maybe I can imagine that.